The auction block reeked of fear and desperation. Hundreds of alien species crowded the massive trading hall on Nexus Station, their various breathing apparatuses creating a symphony of mechanical wheezes and clicks. Credits flowed like water as sentient beings were bought and sold like livestock. Kira stood motionless in her containment field, her emerald eyes scanning the crowd with calculated indifference. The electromagnetic bonds around her wrists hummed with enough power to stop a charging Thraxian warbeast, yet she appeared almost bored. Her long black hair fell like a curtain around her shoulders, partially concealing the intricate tattoos that decorated her arms. Tattoos that told a story none of these fools could read. "Next item," the auctioneer's translator box crackled. "One human female, designation K774. Previous owner claims she was a military asset, though documentation is questionable." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. "Starting bid, 50 credits. A Zephyrian merchant with too many eyes raised a tentacle. "What's her specialty? Combat training? Technical skills?" The auctioneer consulted his datapad with obvious discomfort. According to the manifest, she was a gardener. The laughter that followed was not nervous. It was cruel, mocking, filled with the kind of derision reserved for the utterly worthless. A gardener. On a galaxy where most planets were either industrial wastelands or sterile military outposts, what possible use could anyone have for someone who grew plants? 50 credits for a dirt pusher? Wheezed a Blorvac trader, his multiple stomachs jiggling with mirth. "I wouldn't pay 50 credits for her boots." "Maybe she can grow weeds in my storage compartments," added a Nexian captain, triggering another wave of laughter. Through it all, Kira remained silent. She had learned long ago that silence was often more powerful than words. These creatures saw what they expected to see. A broken human female, captured and defeated, worth nothing more than spare parts. They couldn't see the way her muscles remained perfectly balanced despite her restraints, or how her breathing never quickened despite the humiliation. They certainly couldn't see the small smile that touched the corner of her mouth. "Do I hear 60 credits?" The auctioneer tried, but the crowd's attention was already wandering. A human gardener was barely worth the energy to mock. That's when she heard it, a voice cutting through the din like a blade through silk. 2,000 credits. The hall fell silent. Every eye, sensor, and optical organ turned toward the source of the bid. Standing at the back of the crowd was a figure that seemed impossibly out of place among the rough traders and slavers. He was tall and lean, with the kind of quiet presence that suggested depth rather than decoration. His clothing was simple but well-made, and his hands were the hands of someone who worked with living things. Marcus Chen had been watching the auction for 3 hours, waiting. He had tracked Kira across half the galaxy, following rumors and whispers, paying bribes to information brokers who thought they were selling him lies. The Dragon Lady of the Kepler front was supposed to be dead, killed when her ship was destroyed over Centauri Prime. But Marcus knew better. He knew exactly who was standing on that auction block, and more importantly, he knew why she was letting herself be sold. The auctioneer's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Sir, did you say 2,000? "I did." Marcus stepped forward, and the crowd parted before him like grass before a scythe. There was something about the way he moved that made even the most hardened slavers step aside. "For the gardener! 2,000 credits for a human female with no apparent skills?" The Blorvac trader, who had mocked Kira earlier, turned his bulk toward Marcus. "Are you insane, human? What could you possibly want with worthless cargo like that?" Marcus looked at the trader with eyes that held depths the alien couldn't fathom. "I need someone who understands how things grow." "You could buy 10 agricultural drones for half that price," protested another bidder. "Drones don't understand life," Marcus replied quietly. They just follow programming. The auctioneer, sensing profit, quickly regained his composure. Do I hear any counterbids? The crowd erupted in mocking laughter. Let the fool have his expensive dirt pusher, someone called out. Maybe he can grow himself some sense. 2,000 credits going once. Marcus felt every alien eye in the room boring into him with amusement and disdain. To them, he was just another stupid human, probably recently escaped from some agricultural colony, too naive to understand the value of credits. They couldn't see what he saw when he looked at Kira. They couldn't see the ghost of a smile that crossed her face when their eyes met. Going twice? In that moment of eye contact, an entire conversation took place without words. Marcus saw the slight shift in her posture that told him she was ready. Kira saw the tiny nod that confirmed what she had suspected from the moment he spoke. This was no random buyer with too much money and too little sense. This was exactly who she had been waiting for. Sold to the human gentleman for 2,000 credits. As the containment field flickered off and Kira stepped down from the auction block, the crowd was already dispersing, their attention moving to the next lot. A cargo hold full of Rigelian crystals that would actually be worth their time. The human and his expensive mistake were already forgotten. Marcus approached slowly, his hands visible and empty. Kira Jang, I presume? Just Kira now, she said, her voice carrying a hint of an accent that suggested she had been born somewhere the sun shone differently. And you would be? Marcus Chen. I run a research station in the Outer Rim. I've been looking for you for a very long time. Looking for me, or looking for the Dragon Lady? Marcus considered the question carefully. Around them, the auction continued, the sounds of commerce and cruelty filling the air. I've been looking for someone who could help me understand something that shouldn't exist. And what makes you think a simple gardener could help with that? The smile that crossed Marcus's face was warm but tinged with something else, something that spoke of secrets and knowledge hard won. Because you're not just any gardener. You're the gardener who made the gardens of New Eden bloom in the dead soil of a war-torn world. You're the gardener who turned a barren asteroid into a green paradise that fed 10,000 refugees. You're the gardener who died 3 years ago when her transport was destroyed, Kira finished. At least, that's what the official records say. Official records can be wrong, and sometimes they're exactly what they need to be. Marcus gestured toward the exit, where his modest transport waited among the sleek predator ships of the traders and raiders. Shall we discuss the terms of your employment somewhere more private? As they walked through the crowded station corridors, past species from 100 different worlds, Marcus explained his situation. His research station was located on a planet called Haven, 3 weeks from the nearest shipping lane. He had been working there for 5 years, studying what should have been impossible, a biosphere that had somehow survived the kind of stellar radiation that should have sterilized everything for light years around. The planet shouldn't exist, he said as they boarded his ship. According to every model we have, it should be a dead rock. Instead, it's the most vibrant ecosystem I've ever seen. Plants that shouldn't be able to survive anywhere, thriving in conditions that would kill anything else. And you think I can help you understand why? Marcus sealed the airlock and began the launch sequence. I think you might be the only person in the galaxy who can. As Haven's Reach lifted off from Nexus Station, neither of them noticed the small tracking device that had attached itself to their hull. In the depths of the trading station, Admiral Vex of the Hegemony Fleet watched their departure on his tactical display with interest. The Dragon Lady was supposed to be dead. If she wasn't, then certain people in very high places had some explaining to do. And if she was truly alive, then she knew things that could unravel the Hegemony's carefully constructed version of history. Vex activated his communications array. Priority message to command. The K774 asset has been acquired by an unknown human, initiating pursuit protocols. 3 hours later, 2 hegemony destroyers broke orbit and set course for the Outer Rim. Marcus's research station appeared in their view screen after 3 weeks of jump space travel. A cluster of domes and towers nestled among what looked like an impossible garden. Even from orbit, Kira could see that Haven defied every rule of planetary science. The continents were green from pole to pole, with massive forests that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. "Welcome to Haven," Marcus said as their ship descended through an atmosphere that smelled of growing things. "Population? 2. Well, 3 now." As they landed, Kira saw something that made her breath catch. Everywhere she looked, plants grew with a vitality that seemed almost supernatural. Trees reached heights that should have been impossible in the planet's gravity. Flowers bloomed in colors that didn't exist in normal spectra, and underneath it all, she could feel something else, a presence, vast and patient and utterly alien. "Marcus," she said quietly as they stepped onto the landing platform, "exactly what kind of research have you been doing here?" Before he could answer, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Not the sharp shock of seismic activity, but something rhythmic and purposeful. Something that felt almost like a heartbeat, Kira whispered. Marcus nodded grimly. "Welcome to Haven, Kira. I hope you're ready to meet our host." The laboratory complex was a marvel of integrated architecture, built not on the planet's surface, but within it, as if the structures had grown from the soil itself. Crystalline walls pulsed with veins of bioluminescent material, providing gentle illumination that seemed to breathe with the rhythm Kira had felt outside. Marcus led her through corridors lined with specimens that defied classification, plants that moved without wind, flowers that sang in harmonies too complex for human ears, trees that bent toward them as they passed as if aware of their presence. "This is impossible," Kira murmured, running her fingers along a wall that felt warm and somehow alive. "The energy requirements alone." "That's what I thought for the first 2 years," Marcus replied, stopping before a massive viewing window that looked out into what could only be described as the planet's nervous system. Vast root networks stretched into the depths, glowing with patterns of information that flowed like thought made visible. Until I realized I was asking the wrong questions. Which were, how is this possible, but instead of why is this necessary? The viewing chamber opened into a vast underground cavern, and Kira felt her breath leave her lungs. The space was larger than most starship hangars, filled with structures that were part botanical garden, part computer core, part something else entirely. At the center grew a tree that dwarfed anything she had ever seen, its trunk easily 100 meters across, its branches disappearing into the cavern ceiling far above. But it was what surrounded the tree that made her pulse quicken. Thousands upon thousands of pods hung from the branches like fruit, each one roughly the size of a human being, each one glowing with the same gentle bioluminescence that suffused the entire complex. And within each pod, barely visible through the translucent walls, were shapes that were unmistakably sentient beings from dozens of different species. "Marcus," Kira's voice was barely a whisper, "what is this place?" "A hospital," he said simply. "Or maybe a sanctuary. I'm still not entirely sure." Before she could respond, the air around them shimmered, and a presence made itself known. Not a voice in the traditional sense, but communication that bypassed the ears entirely and spoke directly to consciousness itself. "Welcome, Kira Jang. We have been waiting." The sensation was unlike anything she had experienced, even during her years as a military operative, when contact with alien intelligence was routine. This was deeper, older, carrying with it the weight of eons and the patience of geological time. "You can speak?" she asked aloud. We speak as forests speak to those who know how to listen. You are the one who tends the growing things. You understand the language of root and leaf, of soil and seed. We have need of such understanding. Marcus watched as Kira processed what was happening. Over the years, he had learned to recognize the expression that crossed a person's face when they first made contact with Haven's intelligence. Wonder mixed with a fundamental shift in understanding about life itself. The beings in the pods, Kira said, her training allowing her to focus on practical concerns even as her worldview restructured itself. Are they prisoners? They are refugees, survivors of conflicts that would have consumed them entirely. We offer healing and peace until they are ready to return to their lives. Refugees from what conflicts? The presence seemed to hesitate, and around them, the bioluminescent patterns in the walls shifted to deeper, more troubled hues. From the harvest wars that your kind call the hegemony campaigns. The name hit Kira like a physical blow. The hegemony campaigns had been the Galactic Council's official term for a series of police actions designed to bring rebellious worlds into compliance with interstellar law. She had participated in 3 of them during her military service, believing she was fighting for peace and stability. It was only later, much later, that she had learned the truth about what those campaigns really were. "You're harboring war criminals," she said carefully, though without accusation. "We harbor those who were labeled criminals by those who committed the true crimes. Look closer, Kira Zhang. See what your military leaders chose not to report." The walls around them became transparent, revealing recording devices that projected 3-dimensional images into the air. Kira found herself watching scenes from battlefields she recognized, but from perspectives she had never seen. Instead of the quick, clean military actions described in official reports, she saw systematic extermination campaigns. Entire species being hunted to extinction not for their resistance to council authority, but for resources they controlled or territories they occupied. "This is impossible," she breathed. But even as she said it, pieces of her own experience began to fit together in new and horrible ways. Orders that had never made tactical sense. Targets that had shown no hostile intent. The way certain areas were declared off-limits to rescue operations. "I fought in these campaigns," she told the presence. "I was there. You were there, but you were not allowed to see. Your species has a remarkable capacity for compartmentalization. Your commanders used this trait to ensure that even honorable soldiers could participate in dishonorable actions." "The Dragon Lady missions," Marcus said quietly. "They weren't really black ops, were they? They were cleanup operations." Kira's face had gone very pale. The Dragon Lady had been her call sign during the final campaign, when she had led a series of supposedly covert strikes against terrorist installations. The targets had been remote, lightly defended, and had fallen with suspicious ease. At the time, she had attributed their success to superior intelligence and planning. You were sent to eliminate witnesses, populations who had seen too much, who knew too much about the true nature of the campaigns. Your effectiveness in these missions made you problematic to those who deployed you. "That's why they wanted me dead," she realized. "Not because I was a security risk to enemies of the Council, but because I was a security risk to the Council itself. Your transport was not destroyed by enemy action. The explosion was initiated by your own command structure." The words hung in the air like an indictment. Marcus moved closer, recognizing the look of someone whose entire understanding of their life was being rewritten in real time. "How many?" Kira asked, her voice hollow. "Of your strike team? All perished? You survived because you had begun to suspect and had taken precautions of the populations you were sent to eliminate? Nearly 3 million sentient beings across 17 worlds." Kira sank into a chair that seemed to grow from the floor to support her. 3 million. people she had killed not in combat, not in defense of her species or her ideals, but simply to cover up the crimes of others. "The survivors here," she said finally. "Some of them are from those worlds. Many of them. They do not know who you are. We have judged it best to allow them to heal without the burden of that knowledge. But you're telling me, because you cannot heal what you do not acknowledge, and because Haven itself is dying." The statement was delivered without drama, but its impact filled the cavern. Around them, the bioluminescent patterns flickered uncertainly, and for a moment, Kira could feel something vast and patient and infinitely tired. "Dying how?" Marcus asked. "The same way any organism dies when it expends more energy than it can replenish. We have been maintaining this sanctuary for 3 centuries, healing the wounded from countless conflicts, preserving species that would otherwise be extinct. But the rate of destruction in the galaxy now exceeds our ability to provide sanctuary." "That's why you needed a gardener," Kira said with sudden understanding. "Not for the plants, but for the ecology. You need someone who understands how to make systems sustainable. You begin to comprehend. But the challenge is greater than simple resource management. The hegemony has learned of our existence. Even now, their ships approach our system." As if summoned by the words, alarm signals began to sound throughout the complex. Marcus rushed to a control panel that emerged from the wall at his touch, his fingers dancing across bioluminescent controls. "2 destroyers, hegemony fleet markings," he reported. "They'll be in weapons range in 6 hours." "They're not here for the refugees," Kira said with certainty. "They're here for me. Admiral Vex has been hunting the Dragon Lady for 3 years. The Admiral seeks more than your death. He seeks to claim Haven's resources for the hegemony war machine. An organism capable of sustaining life in impossible conditions would be valuable to those who specialize in making conditions impossible. The implications hit both humans simultaneously. Haven wasn't just a sanctuary. It was potentially the most powerful terraforming force in the galaxy. In the wrong hands, it could be used not to heal worlds, but to claim them, converting any environment to suit the needs of conquerors. "We have to stop them," Marcus said. "We can't," Kira replied flatly. 2 destroyers against a research station? Even if Haven has defenses, we're talking about enough firepower to sterilize continents. "There is another way. But it requires trust and sacrifice and a willingness to become something more than what you have been." "Explain." "Haven does not merely sustain life. Haven can enhance it, accelerate evolution, unlock potentials that exist but remain dormant. Your species in particular carries vast, untapped capabilities." "You want to experiment on us?" "We offer symbiosis. A joining that would grant you abilities you need to protect this sanctuary, while granting us the perspective we need to survive in a galaxy that grows more hostile each day." Marcus and Kira exchanged looks. The proposal was literally alien, offering possibilities that human science insisted were impossible. But then, everything about Haven violated human scientific understanding. "What kind of abilities?" Marcus asked. "The ability to influence biological systems directly, to accelerate growth, direct evolution, heal wounds that would otherwise be fatal, to become, in effect, gardeners not just of plants, but of life itself. And the cost? You would no longer be entirely human. The changes, once begun, cannot be reversed. Outside, the stars wheeled in their courses, and 2 ships carrying enough destructive power to end a civilization drew steadily closer. In 6 hours, Admiral Vex would arrive to claim both the Dragon Lady and the greatest biological weapon in the galaxy, unless 2 humans chose to stop being human first. "If we do this," Kira said slowly, "what happens to the people in the pods? The refugees? They heal, as they have always healed, but they will have guardians capable of protecting them from those who would use their pain for profit. Marcus looked at Kira, seeing in her eyes the same calculation he was making. The math was brutal but simple. Certain death for everyone on Haven, or uncertain transformation for the two of them. "I've spent 5 years learning to listen to what this planet was trying to tell me," he said. "I'm ready to hear what it has to teach." Kira nodded slowly. "I've been the Dragon Lady. Maybe it's time to find out what dragons are really capable of. Then let us begin. But know this, what you become will be shaped not just by our gifts, but by who you choose to be when you possess them. Choose wisely, for the galaxy will need true guardians in the trials ahead." The transformation chamber was less like medical equipment and more like being embraced by the planet itself. Kira lay in a cocoon of living tissue that pulsed with the rhythm of Haven's great heart, while tendrils of bio-neural interface material established connections with her nervous system. The process was surprisingly gentle, like being gradually awakened to senses she had never known she possessed. Marcus underwent the same procedure in an adjacent chamber, and through the strange new awareness that was developing, Kira could feel his presence alongside her own. More than that, she could feel Haven itself, not as an alien intelligence imposed from outside, but as a vast extension of her own consciousness. "Do not fight the joining," the presence whispered, though now it felt more like her own thoughts speaking to her. "Let yourself become what you were always meant to be." The changes began slowly. Enhanced perception allowed her to see the electromagnetic auras that surrounded all living things, to sense the chemical communications that passed between plants, to feel the deep geological forces that shaped continents. Her body adapted, becoming stronger and more resilient, but also more sensitive to the intricate web of life that connected every organism on the planet. But it was when the destroyers entered Haven's atmosphere that she truly understood what she had become. Admiral Vex stood on the bridge of the Decimator, watching the impossible planet grow larger on his tactical display. His intelligence reports had been accurate. Haven was indeed a biological anomaly that defied every known law of planetary science. What the reports had failed to capture was the sheer scope of the phenomenon. This wasn't just an unusually fertile world, this was a living organism the size of a planet. "Life sign readings are off the charts," reported his tactical officer, a cybernetically enhanced Nexian whose emotional dampeners prevented him from expressing the awe that would otherwise have overwhelmed him. "The entire planetary surface appears to be a single interconnected organism." "Perfect," Vex growled, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction. "The Council has been looking for a renewable resource to support our expansion into the Outer Rim. This planet could terraform 1,000 worlds. Sir, we're also detecting the life signs of approximately 50,000 sentient beings in various states of suspended animation. They appear to be distributed throughout underground complexes. Survivors from the campaigns, no doubt. They'll make useful test subjects for determining how the planetary organism interacts with different biologies." Vex turned to his weapons officer. "Prepare selective bombardment. I want the surface installations disabled, but the biological infrastructure intact." "Admiral," the communications officer interrupted. "We're receiving a transmission from the surface. Audio only. Let's hear what they have to say." The voice that filled the bridge was unmistakably human, but there was something else underneath it. Harmonics that spoke of vast spaces and growing things. "Admiral Vex, this is Kira Zhang. I believe you've been looking for me." The bridge fell silent. The Dragon Lady, alive and apparently in control of the most valuable biological resource in the galaxy. Vex's tactical mind immediately began calculating new probabilities. "Ms. Zhang, I was told you died 3 years ago in a transport explosion. Reports of my death were carefully arranged. I needed time to discover what really happened during the hegemony campaigns, what you made me participate in. You participated in necessary actions to maintain galactic stability. If you've turned traitor, that's your choice, but it doesn't change what needs to happen here. And what would that be? This planet represents a strategic resource that cannot be allowed to remain in private hands. You will surrender yourself and turn over control of the biological systems to Council authority. The laugh that came through the communication system was rich with harmonics that made several bridge officers step back from their stations. It was a human laugh, but it carried undertones of geological time and the patience of forests. Admiral, you're welcome to try to take what you think you need, but you should understand what you're really facing. Before Vex could respond, every sensor on both destroyers began registering impossible readings. The forest canopy below them was moving, shifting, reorganizing itself into patterns that looked almost like... Sir? The tactical officer's voice was strained despite his emotional dampeners. The vegetation is forming geometric shapes. They appear to be targeting arrays. Through the viewing ports, they could see massive flowers opening across the continental surfaces, their petals arranging themselves into complex configurations that focused ambient electromagnetic energy into coherent beams. Trees were growing at visible rates, their branches interweaving to form what could only be described as biological artillery. Impossible, Vex breathed. Plants can't... His words were cut off as the first energy discharge reached his ships. It wasn't the brutal force of conventional weapons, but something far more insidious. Where the beams touched the destroyer hulls, metal began to change, developing crystalline growths that spread like infection. Within minutes, both ships were partially encased in living tissue that pulsed with its own inner light. "Weapon systems are down," reported the tactical officer. "The biological growth is interfacing with our electronics. It's not destroying them. It's incorporating them." "Sir," the communications officer added, "we're receiving data streams directly through the organic interfaces. The plant matter it's talking to our computers." On the surface of Haven, Kira stood in a grove that had become her command center. Her consciousness expanded to encompass the entire planetary defense network. Through Marcus, who had integrated with Haven's resource management systems, she could monitor the status of every system on the planet. Through Haven itself, she could feel the confusion and growing fear of the soldiers trapped in their increasingly living ships. "They expect violence," Haven observed through their shared awareness. "They cannot comprehend protection that does not require destruction." "Then let's show them something new," Kira replied, her voice carrying across multiple communication channels simultaneously. Aboard the Decimator, Vex watched in growing horror as his ship was gradually converted into something that was part vessel, part organism. The biological growths weren't just covering the hull, they were integrating with life support, navigation, even the crew quarters. But instead of the hostile takeover he expected, the changes were making everything work better. Air recycling became more efficient, artificial gravity stabilized, even the food synthesizers began producing meals that actually tasted good. "Admiral," came Zhang's voice again, "your crew isn't in danger, but they are about to receive an education." "What kind of education?" "The kind that shows them what the galaxy looks like from the perspective of the species you've been exterminating." The biological interfaces that had grown throughout both ships suddenly activated, creating direct neural connections with every member of both crews. But instead of pain or coercion, what followed was something far more profound, shared experience that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to empathy. Every soldier, every officer, every crew member suddenly found themselves experiencing memory fragments from the refugees sleeping in Haven's pods. They felt what it was like to watch their homeworlds burn under pacification bombardments. They experienced the terror of families separated during relocation operations. They lived through the desperation of survivors trying to find sanctuary anywhere in a galaxy that had labeled them enemies of peace. But more than that, they experienced the healing that Haven provided. They felt the patient care that nursed traumatized minds back to wholeness, the gentle restoration of hope in those who had lost everything, the gradual rebuilding of trust in a universe that had betrayed them. Admiral Vex found himself reliving the memories of a Kepler resistance fighter whose family had been eliminated in one of his own operations. But he also experienced the forgiveness that same fighter had found after years of Haven's healing, the way hatred had been transformed into understanding, how the desire for revenge had been replaced by a commitment to preventing such suffering in others. "This is psychological warfare," he gasped, but his protest lacked conviction. The experiences felt too real, too genuine to be fabricated. "This is truth," Kira's voice replied, "something the hegemony has worked very hard to keep hidden from its own forces." Marcus's consciousness touched hers across the planetary network. The integration is complete. Both ships are now part of Haven's defensive grid, but more importantly, both crews have access to the historical records they were never allowed to see. Throughout both destroyers, soldiers and officers were accessing data archives that revealed the true scope of the hegemony campaigns. Not the sanitized versions in their mission briefings, but the complete records of systematic genocide disguised as peacekeeping operations. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and sourced directly from their own military databases. "You're showing them classified information," Vex accused, though his own worldview was crumbling as he processed what he was learning about his own career. "I'm showing them suppressed information," Kira corrected. "There's a difference. These records were classified not to protect state security, but to protect state crimes." "The question now," Haven interjected through the shared consciousness, "is what they choose to do with this knowledge." The answer came sooner than anyone expected. On both ships, mutinies began, but not the violent uprisings that military doctrine predicted. Instead, crews simply stopped following orders that they now understood were illegal. Officers who had spent their careers believing they served justice found themselves unable to continue serving injustice. "Admiral," his own tactical officer said, removing the cybernetic enhancers that had been suppressing his emotional responses, "I cannot in good conscience continue this mission." "You're committing treason," Vex warned, but his heart wasn't in the threat. "Sir, with respect, I think we've been committing treason for a very long time. We just didn't know it." Across both ships, the same scene played out. Soldiers who had been trained to follow orders without question were now capable of questioning the source and purpose of those orders. The biological integration with Haven hadn't changed their personalities or loyalties. It had simply given them access to information their own commanders had withheld. "This is what real liberation looks like." Kira's voice carried new harmonics now, speaking not just to the crews, but to every human in the fleet. Not conquest disguised as peacekeeping, but the freedom to make informed choices about the kind of galaxy we want to live in. Admiral Vex found himself alone on his bridge, his entire crew having quietly departed for the surface to begin what they called proper debriefing sessions with the refugees they had been sent to eliminate. The old soldier looked out at Haven's impossible forests and finally began to understand what he had been fighting against all these years. 3 months later, Nexus Station received a most unusual report. The Dragon Lady had indeed been found, but rather than being captured or killed, she had apparently convinced 2 destroyer crews to defect entirely. Admiral Vex himself had resigned his commission and requested asylum on Haven, where he was reportedly learning to grow things instead of destroying them. The Galactic Council's response was swift and predictable. A full battle fleet was dispatched to reclaim the stolen vessels and eliminate the terrorist base that had corrupted loyal soldiers. They found something else entirely: Haven had grown, not just in size, though the planet's forests now stretched across previously barren continents, but in purpose. The refugee pods had opened, their healed occupants now working alongside human converts and former hegemony soldiers to build something unprecedented, a truly integrated galactic community that transcended species boundaries. When the battle fleet arrived, they found their own electronic systems being gently infiltrated by biological interfaces that offered their crews the same choice that had been given to their predecessors: continue following orders based on incomplete information, or learn the truth and make their own decisions. Most chose truth. Within a year, Haven had become the center of a new kind of interstellar civilization, not an empire built on conquest, but a network built on symbiosis. Species that had been enemies for millennia discovered they could coexist when their basic needs for survival and dignity were met. Worlds that had been strip-mined for resources found themselves restored by biological technologies that worked with natural systems rather than against them. The Dragon Lady had become something more than a military operative, or even a gardener. She had become the guardian of a new way of being in the galaxy, one that proved growth was possible without destruction, that strength could exist without oppression, that even the most bitter conflicts could be healed given time and understanding. And in the depths of Haven's living cities, where former enemies worked side by side to tend gardens that spanned continents, Admiral Vex learned to grow flowers that sang in harmonies no human throat could produce, while teaching refugee children from a dozen species how to plant seeds that would become trees tall enough to touch the stars. The galaxy had mocked the Dragon Lady when she was sold for spare credits. Now they sought her wisdom to learn how broken things could be made whole again, how poisoned soil could bloom with life, and how the smallest seeds of compassion could grow into forests of hope that spanned the space between worlds. In the end, the greatest weapon in the galaxy turned out to be a gardener who understood that the most powerful force in the universe was not destruction, but growth.